Well, this morning we are going to finish the Sampson story. We've been looking at the life of Sampson for a while. We've actually looked at 4 stories of the life of Sampson. And today we're going to finish off the last story of Sampson. We're going to look at the death narrative of Sampson. Interesting the way this thing has been going. If we look back at Sampson's life, we see a pattern. We see a pattern of, in the birth narrative, there was hope. It was a good narrative. We read it and went, this is good. This is really good. There's hope for Israel. Sampson is born. He's a Nazarite. God is blessing him. This is good. And then we saw the wedding or the marriage narrative. And in the marriage narrative, we went, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. There's no hope. This went wrong. And then we saw the conflict narratives, which really started as a result of the wedding marriage narrative, the conflict narratives in which Sampson continues to be in conflict with the Philistines, and it ends with him triumphant over the Philistines, killing 1,000 with the jawbone of a donkey, and Sampson crying out to God and God showing up. And we say, this is good, this is good. This brings hope. There's hope in Israel. This is a good thing. And then last week we looked at the Delilah narrative. Samson giving away his strength. Samson giving away his unique relationship with God. Delilah convincing him to tell her the secret of his strength. And Sampson gives away his unique relationship with God. There were three conditions to being a Nazarite, to be set apart from God. And the Nazarite vow was not to drink anything alcoholic, not to be near any dead bodies, and not to cut his hair. Sampson had already given up the first 2. The cutting of your hair was the outward symbol of a unique relationship with God. It was the way in which everybody knew that he was special, he was significant, he was called by God from birth. He was set apart from God. The outward symbol of that was his hair. You can imagine a guy in his 40s having never cut his hair. Never sat down in a barber chair, never trimmed it, never shaped it, never styled it, put it up in 7 braids, and as it grew, he just kept braiding it, and the braids got bigger and bigger and thicker, and it was an outward symbol for everybody to see that Samson was in a unique relationship with God. And Samson decided to give up that unique relationship with God by giving up the secret of why God was with him. Delilah cuts his hair and there's no hope. Hope is gone. It's a bad story. It's a really bad story. Samson realizes that the Spirit of the Lord had left him. His hair is cut. He figures he's going to get up just as he did before in verse 20 of 16. I'm just reviewing. But he did not know that the Spirit of the Lord had left him until he tried his strength and it wasn't there. The saddest comment of his whole life. And so as a result of Samson giving away that special relationship he had, of Samson deciding that he didn't need to stay committed to God, but he could do what he wanted to do, God left him. And the Philistines seized him and subdued him and gouged out his eyes. And so there's Samson put in prison. He can no longer see, has no strength left in him, being mocked daily, strapped as to grinding grain, as an ox or a donkey would be harnessed, and he's pulling around that the wooden bar that's connected to the grinding stone, and he's just going around and around in darkness because he has no eyes, and he has no strength, and he has no hope. And so today we come to the death narrative of Sampson. And I've entitled this The Victorious Death of Sampson. Because look at verse 22. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. I remember reading this as a boy and thinking, okay, this is exciting. This is good. Something's going to happen. This is what I'm waiting for. I remember being so disappointed that Sampson had been captured and he'd been subdued. And I thought, man, this just isn't right for superheroes. And I remember reading this and going, aha, something's going to happen. Something's not going to end hopeless. There is hope. But the hair on his head began to grow again. You know, that's another way of saying what the author has already said in chapter 13 and verse 25 about Sampson. Let me turn there. Judges 13:25. Judges 13:25 is the birth narrative of Sampson. And it says, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him. That's the same thing, just saying it a different way. But the hair on his head began to grow. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir. It gives us hope. It gives us excitement. It gives us the fact that God's not dead. God's alive. God's there. He hasn't abandoned him. He's there. He still has a plan for Sampson. He still wants to do something. The Spirit of God is stirring. He hasn't left him. He's still there. God's going to show up. And the question again, after reading verse 22, the question is, what happens when the Spirit of God begins to stir? What happens when his hair begins to grow? What happens when the Spirit of God begins to stir again in Sampson? Well, we read in verses 23 through the first part of 25. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Sampson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. We find out at the end of the whole story of Sampson, we find out that this whole time it is really about God. It is really about, for the Philistines, gods. The whole ancient Near East mindset is all about their gods. They were always aware of gods in their life. If it rained, it would be because the gods were good. If it didn't, because the gods were bad. If there was some sort of weird phenomenon that was in the sky, it was because the gods were angry. When it was peaceful, it was because the gods were happy. And they always tied what happened in agriculture, in the heavens, rain, all that, in health and well-being. They always tied it to their gods. And they tied it to how well they were serving their gods. And they tied it to the strength of their gods. And they believed that the more they sacrificed and the more they served and the more they gave to the gods, then the stronger the gods would be, and therefore they would have victory in battle. Battles in ancient Near East culture with the Philistines and Israel, it was always about their God. It was never about the judges themselves. It was never about Sampson himself. It's always about God. Samson was a representative of God, Yahweh, Jehovah, the one true creator God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who created the heavens and the earth. Samson was about God, the true God, the only God, the one God. Whereas the Philistines were all about their own gods. Dagon was one of their major gods. And so when they captured Sampson, when they subdued Sampson, when they could bring Sampson in to be tortured, they attributed to their gods. And they said, our God Dagon is greater than Samson's God Jehovah. And so there they are, having this great sacrifice, assembling to have this great sacrifice to Dagon. They're going to celebrate. They're going to extol the wonders of their God Dagon. They're praising their God. Look at, they a great sacrifice to their God, saying, our God has delivered Sampson. They praised their God. Our God has delivered Sampson. For them, it was all about, our God is bigger than your God. Dagon is the one true God, not Jehovah. And so it was never really about Samson alone. It was never really, this whole book of Judges is not about the judges themselves. It's not about Samson himself. It's not about us ourselves. We always make the world about us. We always make the biggest player in the world ourselves. But it's not about us. It's always about God. We're in this struggle between Jehovah God, we're in this struggle between Jesus our Savior, and we're in this struggle between Him and Satan. That's what the world is in, the struggle. Dagon represents Satan. Baal represents Satan. Asherah represents Satan. False gods all represent Satan. And the real battle in our life, in the world, is Jesus, Jehovah, Yahweh, the Creator God, against Satan and his demons. It's not about us. It's about God. It's about the Spirit of God moving. It's about the Spirit of God showing up. And here the Philistines are praising their own God, believing that Jehovah is nothing, believing that Dagon is everything. And do you think God, do you think the true God, do you think Yahweh, do you think Jehovah is going to settle for that? Do you think Jesus is going to allow His glory and His greatness to be shared or stolen by anybody? Never. Never. God will not allow His glory to be taken by anybody else. Oh, sometimes it looks that way. Sometimes people will try to grab God's glory and make themselves something they aren't. But God never stands for that long, because He is God and we are not, nor is anybody else, nor anything else. And so there they are, celebrating how powerful and wonderful and praiseworthy their false god Dagon is. And they're happy about it, and they're singing songs, and just in the same way that the Deborah had a song of victory about how God gave them the victory, the Philistines have their own song of victory, and it's their own song of how they believe their god Dagon gave them the great victory over Jehovah. And so they're in high spirits. They're all there in this big stadium or Coliseum-like thing or whatever it is, and there's many people there. And they call Sampson out. And they say, hey, bring him to entertain us. Let's mock him. Let's make fun of him. Let's just have a little bit of sport with this guy. So they bring him out. Sampson can't see. He has no sight. He's completely blind. And they bring him out of prison. It says he performed for them. Perhaps they were kicking him, using whips on him, punching him, stabbing him, just making fun. Here's the strongest guy in the world. What are you now? You're nothing. Who hit you? Who stabbed you? And they're making fun of him, and they're knocking him down, and they're throwing things at him, and they're just making great sport of him. And the whole crowd is laughing and cheering and jeering and mocking. And Samson can do nothing about it. By the time someone hits him or strikes him, he turns around to swing his arm, and they're gone. He's just there. They're going to kill him. They brought him out to make great sport of him, and that'd be the end of it. Let's get rid of this guy. And the story continues on. When they stood him among the pillars, verse 26, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now, we learn, the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. The place was crowded. The place was filled to capacity. In fact, the place is over capacity. The roof was somehow a flat roof, and people would go on the roof, and there were 3,000 men and women on this roof. And underneath the roof were all the rulers and leaders and probably important people of Philistine, and they were underneath in the shade. And they were all making sport of Samson. And they were laughing and jeering and having a good time with him. All the rulers of the 5 major cities of Philistia were there. The ones that gave Delilah 1,000 shekels of silver each. They paid for this show. They wanted this show to last. They wanted to have a good time. They paid 1,100 shekels of silver for this show. That was their admission price, and they were going to get their money's worth. And they brought Samson out, and he's led around, and they're making fun of him. And he goes to the pillar. Samson said to the servant who held his hand, the servant was carrying him around. The servant was leading him around, rather. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know which way was right or left or up or down or north or south. He couldn't see anything. And he's led by probably, the word here, servant, probably means a small boy. Samson, the mightiest man on earth, the Samson who aggravated the Philistines for 20 years, who killed 1,000 with a jawbone, who did these amazing feats, is now led by a little boy, completely humiliated. Can't do anything on his own. The whole crowd hurling insults. The whole crowd making fun, saying all sorts of things, doing all sorts of things. Every humiliating act you can think of, they were performing on Samson. And they stand him among the pillars. Now, in this temple, often the way things were, it was a temple that had a flat roof over it. And on either side was supported by the walls, and in the middle were 2 pillars that supported the whole roof. And so they take Samson to these 2 pillars. And he says, let me lean against them. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he needs something to prop himself up. Whatever it is. But he's leaning against these 2 pillars. And the crowd is having a great time with him. And it's just up to the rulers as to when they're going to finally end him. But not until they've got their 1,100 shekels worth. And Samson goes to the pillar, the very center of this temple, temple Colosseum type thing. And look what happens in verse 28. Then Samson prayed to the Lord. This is good. This is good. We don't have many times in which we see Samson praying to the Lord. In fact, this is our second time. The first time was after he'd killed 1,000 Philistines and he was dying of thirst, and he cried out to God, and God answered. The second time is he's completely humiliated. He has no hope. He has no help. And he prays to the Lord. And he says, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. And let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson says, Sovereign Lord. Samson recognizes that God is God, and he's not. Samson, who has been the strongest, most powerful, untouchable, nobody can get him, all of a sudden he realizes, well, not all of a sudden, but he's come to a point in life where he realizes that God is God and he is not. He calls him Sovereign Lord. He recognizes that God is above all. He recognizes that he is nothing. He recognizes that he is not God. He's humbled. He's humbled not only in physicalness, but he's humbled in spirit. Sovereign Lord, you have a plan. The God who created everything, the God who knows everything, the God who controls everything, the God who designs everything, the God who knows the beginning from the end, the God who can do everything and anything. This is the God he's praying to. He says, you are God. I get it, you are God. I should have known that all along, but now I know you are God. Here I am, having rejected you, now realizing that you are God. He says, Sovereign Lord, you are God. Remember me. Samson, who realizes that he's nobody, remember me. Samson roamed all throughout Philistia, all throughout Israel. Everybody knew who he was. Nobody could forget Samson. He was the guy that everybody talked about, the dinner table, while they were getting water. I mean, everybody talked about Samson. All their chores, whatever it was they're doing. Hey, what's going on with Samson? Have you heard Samson? What's going on with Samson? They all knew Samson. Samson was like the sporting person of, what's going on with this tournament or that tournament, and who's the biggest sports figure in the world? Well, that was Samson. All of the newsreels were about Samson. All of the gossip was about Samson. All of the interest was about Samson. Yet here he says, Sovereign God, remember me. What a difference from the proud, arrogant Samson to a humbled Samson. God, Sovereign One, if you would you think about me? I'm nobody. I've blown it. I've ruined it. I realize that I'm nothing. I walked around thinking I'm God. I walked around thinking how good I am and how great I am and untouchable I am and special I am, but I recognize that, God, I'm really nobody. So God of the universe, the one who has a plan and design for my life, if you would you pay attention to me? Would you just condescend to me? Would you remember me? Please, God, strengthen me just once more. God, just once more. And let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. There's a lot going on in that statement because he begins recognizing God's sovereignty. He begins recognizing his own humility. He recognizes that he has no strength except that which comes from God. He has nothing except that which comes from God. He recognizes that, and yet he still doesn't quite get it. Because Samson hasn't matured. Samson hasn't matured in his spiritual life. He's still a spiritual baby. All 20 years, all 40 years of his life, knowing who God is, being set aside by God, having a special relationship with God, he doesn't grow in his relationship with God. He hasn't grown. He's taken it all for granted. He hasn't worked on a relationship with God. He hasn't wanted to know who God is. He just wants the benefits of being special. And he says, let me get revenge. It's still about revenge for Samson. It's still about me for Samson. God, I recognize you're God. I recognize I'm not. And I want revenge. So would you just give me strength one more time so I can get revenge? Here he's in Dagon's temple, where everybody's praising the glory and greatness of Dagon above Jehovah. And rather than Samson saying, God, I want you to be known as the God of all the world. God, I want your glory to be above anybody else's glory. Samson is not spiritually mature enough to know that. And he says, God, give me one more act of revenge. Don't let me die like this. But let me take these guys down because they took my eyes. Well, Samson, not being particularly spiritually mature, asks for something that revenge for himself, but God is faithful. God is faithful to himself. God is not going to share his glory with Dagon. God is not going to share his glory with any falseness, with any false gods, false teaching, false anything. He's not going to share his truth, his glory with that. Samson is still an instrument whom he can use. Samson is still has the call of God upon his life, and God has been faithful and will remain faithful to Samson. And so God is going to show up. Because remember, his hair started to grow. The Spirit of the Lord is moving. God, who is sovereign, has a plan. And then, in verse 29, then Samson reached toward the two central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. And thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. So get the picture. He's at the two pillars. We don't know if he was pushing this way or if he was pushing that way on the pillars. I mean, when you see the movies and when we think of it, he's between the two pillars and he's pushing out. But he could very well be at the two pillars pushing this way. Whatever the case might be, he's at the two pillars and he starts pushing. He's bracing himself and he starts pushing. Can you imagine what people would be doing? They'd be laughing. They'd be mocking. They'd be yelling, "Look what he's trying to do. He's trying to push over the pillars. Oh, the fool, whatever." And they're mocking him. And Samson is pushing and trying to push the whole thing over. And they know he's trying to push it over. That's the only reason he'd be pushing on the pillars. Not because he's stretching his calves or anything. He wants to, and they're laughing at him. This guy that they're mocking, this guy who has no eyes, this guy who's been strapped to this thing like a donkey, and the guy that they're about to kill, whatever. Try it, do what you want. And they're laughing at him and mocking him and jeering him, maybe throwing things at him, maybe spitting on him, who knows. And then the roof gives a bit of a shake. There's a tremor. And the 3,000 men and women on the roof and all the people underneath the roof go, "Whoa, was that an earthquake? What was that all about?" And then a little bit of dust starts falling from the roof. And there's a little bit of a grating sound where the pillars begin to be dislodged from the sockets that they're in. And people begin to scramble off the roof. And people begin to run on top of each other. And people begin to shout and yell and scream and "Let's get out of here." And there's dust falling down and there's pieces of the roof falling down and there's more grating noises and screeching sounds and rumbling sounds and cracking sounds and the roof is falling and pieces of the roof are falling and people are falling through the cracks and falling off the roof and it's mass chaos and Samson is pushing and nobody is mocking him anymore, but they're yelling and fleeing for their lives and trying to get off the roof, and Samson gives one last lunge and the pillars with a great crack come down. And the whole stadium shakes. And the roof comes tumbling down, killing everybody in there, including Samson. And it says that Samson killed more when he died than when he lived. The greatest victory Samson has was in his death. It's interesting. After the days of the judges, the Philistines were still a power over Israel. However, not so much. Because you had the 5 major rulers and you had all the rulers of the cities who died. That day, Samson began to subdue the Philistines. That day was the greatest day of Samson's life where the Spirit of God was moving upon him. And what he asked Samson to do at the beginning when he was born, Samson finally gets done in his death. I was always saddened when I read verse 30. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." I still don't like that verse, because I want the superhero to live. I want Samson to somehow miraculously escape. But Samson knows that's not going to happen. Samson's come to terms that he's not special anymore. He's not seeking to be special. He's not asking God for a miracle. He's not saying, "God, I'm going to push this whole temple down and everybody in here is going to die, but somehow put this umbrella over me that pieces of chunks of cement and whatever fall off of me and I live." He's not asking to be special. He's not seeking to be someone with supernatural powers. He's come to terms with his weakness. He's come to terms with his own mortality. He's come to terms that he's not God, and that he's not invincible. And he's come to terms that it will be enough if God shows up and he doesn't. See, before, Samson's life was all about, I want to show up. Even if God doesn't. Even if they don't know who God is, I want them to know me. Because I'm Samson. I'm special. I'm set apart. I'm significant. I'm invincible. It's all about me. And if God wants to show up, that's great. But I want people to know me. Samson, on the day of his death, finally gets it. I think finally gets it. It will be enough if God shows up, and not me. He wants God to be showing up. He wants people to know who God is. And he doesn't want to walk out of there with some sort of supernatural story to say, "Look at me." I think he finally gets it. It's about the glory of God. It's about the greatness of God. It's not about us. It's not about the blessing. It's about the one who blesses. And when he finally gets that, he has the greatest victory of his entire life. He has a victorious death. He kills more when he died than when he lived. He unseats the power of the Philistines so that 100 years later, King David finally defeats them for good, and the Philistines are no longer. Samson began that. Samson got that. Samson was used of God for that. And then we have the epilogue. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He led Israel 20 years. That's a great ending. His brothers and his father's whole family went to get him. As everybody's sorting through the rubble, all the relatives are sorting through the rubble and finding their loved ones, the people, his family from Israel, go all the way 40 miles to Gaza. They hear about the event, they go and they find Samson, and they bring him back home. And they give him an honorable burial. The people of Israel who wouldn't follow him, the people of Israel who didn't have much to do with him, who tied him up and were willing to give him over to die with the Philistines, they come and honor him. Samson, that day of his death, truly did lead as God wanted him to lead. Because he got it. It's about God showing up. What happens when the Spirit of God begins to move? You know the answer. What happens when the Spirit of God begins to move? Anything. Anything can happen. When God shows up, anything can happen. God is not limited by our limitations. Let me say that again. God is not limited by our limitations. When the Spirit of God begins to move, anything is possible. Nothing is impossible. When the Spirit of God begins to move, you can be sure that God will show up. And when God shows up, anything can happen. He's not limited by what I think can happen. He's not limited by what I can do. He's not limited by my physical or mental or spiritual limitations. When God decides to move, the sovereign God shows up. Because that's what God loves to do. God shows up to say, I am God. I am sovereign. Not these false gods, not these pretend gods, not anything you think is God. They are not gods. God, Jehovah, Yahweh, Jesus shows up. And He's God. He's Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and Lord of Lords. He is God. And when the Spirit of Christ begins to move, Christ shows up. For those in our church watching, I am amazed because I think God has shown up. I think the Spirit of God has been moving in our church. Our Yes, God, Build Your Church campaign. We are a small group of people. We're not hundreds. We're not thousands. We're not rich, wealthy, have money to spare people. But the Spirit of God began to move. And God showed up. And I know that we gave, as a church family, we gave somewhere in the vicinity of $150,000. See, that's God. That's not what I can do, what you can do, what we can do when we put our minds to it. It's what God does in us, through us, because He is the sovereign God. In our church, we have this wonderful sense of unity and togetherness, and that's not because of who I am or you are or any of us are. It's because the Spirit of God began to move. Because God showed up. Because God showed up for us. Because He's sovereign God. And He said, I want people to know that I am God. And no one else. And nothing else. What happens when the Spirit of God begins to move in your life? You can know that God will show up. You can be assured, guaranteed that God will show up. The Spirit of God is moving. You know, you're watching, you know. The Spirit of God might be moving in your heart today. Might be moving in your life today. And you're saying, this is impossible. There's nothing that can be done about this. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how this is going to be solved. I have no idea. The Spirit of God is moving. He will show up. He's not limited by your weakness or the world's weakness or the world's limitations. When the Spirit of God moves, anything is possible. Know this God, that He is sovereign God. Samson hit it on the head. He's the sovereign God, the mighty God, the great and powerful God. There is no God but Jehovah. There is no God but Jesus. Jesus is God with skin on. And whatever it is that's going on in your life, when the Spirit of God moves, know that He'll show up. Let Him show up. Expect Him to show up. Make it about God showing up, not about you showing up. Because it's not about us. It's not about Sampson. It's not about the judges. It's not about us. It's about God showing up in our lives. Because ultimately, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. but against the powers and principalities of this dark world. It is the struggle between God and the false gods. Let God show up in your life to glorify Him, to show the world around us that He is sovereign, that Jesus is the one and only God, and no one else. What happens when the Spirit of God moves? Anything is possible. Let me pray. God in heaven, sovereign God, the one to whom glory and honor and power and majesty can be ascribed, the only one to which that can be ascribed. You are God. We are not, nor is anybody or anything else. God, show up in our lives. Be victorious over all the other false gods and falsehoods in this life. Show up. Holy Spirit, begin to move. Continue to move. Show up in our lives, because we need you. Forgive us for making it about us. Forgive us for making it about me. Be glorified in my life, God. I don't need to be rescued. I want you to show up, not me. We ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Thank you for joining us today. May you know God as He shows up in your life. May you draw nearer to Him. May His glory be brought to bear upon your life. And may you show the others around you the glory of God. Amen.